So, really, this is our inaugural session of our inaugural class of leadership as a spiritual practice, okay? So, a couple of things that we're going to request from you throughout the next 10 weeks. One, we've reviewed the material, we've pulled some stuff together. I think the way that we describe this, and I want to be real clear about how we're going to run this is a facilitated discussion. So we are going to very much rely on the genius of the room and not the genius of the front table. Okay, less on the genius of the front table, more on the genius of the room. And we're going to be uncovering together what leadership means as it relates specifically to leadership at the Kirk and spiritual leadership. What does that mean? You know, if I was to say to you, spiritual leadership, how do we kind of put that into some kind of perspective? And, you know, as I look at the room, and we're all very seasoned professionals here, we've probably gone to some leadership class at some point, or many leadership classes in our corporate lives. We've gone to classes outside. What we really want to do here is kind of take a deep dive again and thinking along the lines of spiritual leadership. What does spiritual leadership mean? So before we dive into the material, and since this is our first time together, just to make sure that everybody knows everybody, if you'll just introduce yourself, and what I'd really like to hear from you is, not knowing what we were going to do for the next 10 weeks, other than having, you know, here's an outline of the 10 topics. What's your takeaway? What would be a nugget for you when you walk away from here in December and we throw our party to celebrate getting through this? What would be a good nugget for you to take away? Because I'd like to kind of capture that. So Craig, if you could do a little capturing for me of just generally what nuggets we could take away. And we want to make sure that we include that throughout. So what are your expectations kind of walking in the door? Okay? And I'm going to be quiet now. So let's start with
Andy. You go first.
I am. You have to leave early, so that's your dues.
I'm Mandy Ritter, and a couple things about the class that was interesting. In groups where I don't know anybody, when we do like breakout groups, and that's at work and here at church, it happened in our introduction to the Kirk, or getting to know the Kirk class, exploring the Kirk class, that's what it's called. When we're in small groups and they say pick a leader, I'm usually picked even though I don't volunteer myself, and I don't know how that happens. Probably because I talk too much. But you know, how to take that when it's not a leadership position I was seeking out, but one where I just was chosen, how to apply some of these practices when I'm not prepared.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely. Colleen?
I'm Colleen Garrett. I don't know that I've ever actually had any like formal leadership training. So that's part of the reason why I'm here. And the other part is that I've been at home with my daughter for the past 5 years, and so I'd kind of like just a refresher of, you know, obviously I've been doing it for a while because I actually was
what were you? 5 years ago.
I was an attorney 5 years ago.
Oh, there you go.
And I was in charge of an office, and I had like, I don't know, 8 or 10 people underneath me, and I was obviously leading them in one way or another. And I just, I guess I should like to know what I should have been doing. And I guess the other part of it is that here we're dealing with volunteers as opposed to employees. And so obviously you have to treat volunteers a little differently than you have to treat employees. So that's kind of where what I'm hoping to get out of this.
Okay.
It's an interesting one, volunteers versus employees. So I like both of what,
And you are?
Kevin Overcash. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you. Start with the start, right? My name is Kevin Overcash, and I guess what I'm looking for is I too get in situations where I'm asked, well, why don't you do that? Or why don't you lead? Or we need a leader for this. Well, why don't you do it? And I get spread too thin. And so I'm looking for application both in church as well as in my life, as well as in my personal life, business life as well as personal life, for these principles for how to be a leader, both from the background as well as the foreground, and not to be spread too thin. So, that's me.
Okay. Yeah, and you know what? part of leadership, and we're going to talk about that here, is the ability to say no. Thank you very much, but no. Okay, Liz?
I'm Liz Broughton, and I'm kind of interested in the spiritual aspect of leadership, like through the enabling team process and building in kind of the prayer share kind of things into meetings. I feel like our committee struggled with that a little bit. Amir's been really good at it. But I'd like to see how to incorporate more spirituality into the leadership positions that I'm in.
Okay.
I'm Sylvia Nygaard. And Liz sort of stole my thunder, not knowing it. Because I was thinking, gosh, why am I here? Spiritual inspiration, I think, and how to get people involved. You know, I'm too busy, and there is a too busy, and I've learned to say no, truly. But there are people who really don't do anything that I feel could do a lot, even in one position, and I'd like to sort of learn how to tap into that
Okay.
spiritual aspect.
Great.
I'm Betsy McFarland, and I'm definitely spread too thin right now, both professionally and personally. And I think I too am very much looking at the spiritual aspects of what leadership is about. I'm very comfortable in leadership role, and also look for ways to develop leadership. And I think that I can better do that if I understand perhaps some of the spiritual aspects of that.
Okay. Great. Amir?
Are you skipping Craig?
We're going to skip Craig.
I'm
Craig's
Andy.
here because he was voluntold. You all volunteered. There's a big difference.
Well, I'm not so sure about that. I was in an
He was
enabling team
voluntold.
meeting with Craig, who kind of browbeat me to come.
I'll volunteer later. I will.
So I'm Amir Edwards, and I appreciate Liz's comments, but that's not been easy, you know. So I think incorporating the new word share prayer concept into meetings and as a leader, that's been somewhat difficult. But the thing I struggle with mostly as a leader is public prayer. And so if I could come out of this with some better understanding of, you know, that, maybe more spiritually driven way of doing that, that would be the thing that I struggle with most.
Okay. Tom?
I'm Tom Bennett. I guess there are a lot of nuggets I hope to take home from this, but maybe one of the most important is the answer to a question, what's my duty? And it's not so much the difference between saying yes and no to volunteer opportunities. It's more asking that question in a spiritual context. When I look at myself as a leader, I think I do the right things. I'm not sure I do the right things in the right spirit. And I'd like to work on the spirit.
Okay. Great. Okay, Beth?
My name's Beth Williams, and I could probably ditto a bunch of what was said here. Especially, I can relate to you, Mandy, because when I'm in groups, I tend to gravitate to the supervisory or management position in the group, and I'm not always very confident with it, especially in a large group, forget it. So I'd like to learn a little more confidence, and also how to remember that, you know, people are spiritual beings. If you can relate to them spiritually, then, you know, I think that can help you manage them or work together as a team, and so I'd like to bring some of that out.
Okay. Okay. So,
And I'll go, 'cause
yeah, Craig,
I'm
go.
part of the class too, I think. I've been excited about this material and about the ministry team migration and about spiritual leadership as a notion for a while. And consequently, I want to be invested in journeying with a group who is interested in the same thing, and hopefully not only enabling them to learn from each other, as Victoria said, but also passing on things that we've learned, since I do have gray in my beard and my hair and everywhere else. So maybe I have one or two things that I can contribute.
Great. And I will share as well. One of my great passions is to support leaders who build great leaders. So what I'm hoping for, and my vision as we move to the ministry team model, as we start to do all the things that we say we want to do, is to make that come alive from a paper place to, if someone said to me, what does good look like? How do you know when you got there? Is for every member of this congregation to feel that they're a leader. So whether it's you're in a group, hey, you'd be a great leader, would you be willing to be a leader, or would you be willing to supervise, or however it comes across, more that we all feel in our heart, in our spirit, that we're already leaders. And that leader doesn't mean I've taken on this heavy weight and this heavy burden on my back and, what do I do now, kind of thing. So my vision is that whatever chair we're sitting in, wherever that chair happens to be in the Kirk, we feel that we're a leader. So this, to me, is a jumping off point, an enabling point for getting to that place when we get there. And, I know it's not tomorrow, but we need to have a jumping off point. And so I'm excited. Craig's excited. Our whole team is just excited that you all have volunteered to kind of journey with us, at least through this first pass. And we really, really, really are going to request and welcome your feedback through this. This helped me, this not so much. Can we deep dive a little bit more here? We've got a schedule and an agenda, and we've got work plans, and we've got notebook stuff. And you'll know between Craig and me and Mel and Alice and Melinda, who are going to be supporting as well, we're all very flexible. So we will be able to stretch that, what we're doing and what you really want to cover. So please feel free to stop us, restart us, whatever we need to do. Again, it's a facilitated conversation, it's not a class. Okay? So, any questions before we kind of jump in? Okay. So, to model the ministry team model, we're going to kind of start with a very short word share prayer today. Okay? And when I say very short, you'll look at the top of your materials. For those of you who didn't hear me say it, our materials are going to be online. So all of the course materials are online. We are going to hand them out as well in class because there's opportunities for you to do some journaling, for you to write some things down, jot some notes. You may choose whatever recycling format works for you to figure out whether, if you really don't want the material here and you want to keep it online and you don't feel that you're getting benefit, please save a tree. I'm okay with that. And I'm having them copied. We're having them copied in 3-hole punch, so if you decide that you would like to make a notebook, each week you'll be able to just add that to your notebook, okay? And so let's talk, I'm going to sit for a second. Let's talk about Psalm 78, 72, okay? And I'm going to read it once. And then I'm going to ask us all to read it in unison, okay? And David shepherded them with integrity of heart, with skillful hands he led them. So let's read it together.
And
David shepherded them with integrity of heart, with skillful hands he led them.
What I'd like for you to do and to share with us is anything that you observe about this verse either a particular word that speaks to you, a phrase that speaks to you, how it's worded. What does it say to you as it relates to leadership? And I'm just gonna throw it over to the group.
I think the most important word in that quote, at least for me, is integrity. Maybe the most important quality a leader has, maybe even more important than vision. That the leader has some kind of moral compass, and that you're not going to get a different answer the next day from the first day if it's something basic and fundamental and, I don't know, about fairness and about morality. Details of things always change, but the quality of integrity, that's something you can rely on.
It's funny, I circled that same word, but what I wrote underneath it was the phrase you just used when you were sharing, was the phrase right spirit. You know, to have the integrity within ourselves to be leading and operating in the right frame of mind, you know, with the right purpose and the right feeling about that. And the other two that I circled were shepherded, because that's, you know, the vision of that and leadership is a little different. And I think because we're in a worship setting, that word carries different meaning. And then the one that always gets me, that always makes me feel like I'm not a good leader, is the phrase skillful hands. Because I always want to figure out what that skill actually is before I do anything. And sometimes I don't feel like I have it, you know, and so like to actually do something, you know, to have a particular skill, but not to think, or to be able to think of the leadership as a skill as opposed to actually doing something. I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
That's right, that's where I went to. I mean, you went to heart of the matter with the integrity. I think that's the point of spiritual-based leadership. I get hung up on the doing. I lead by doing. And that is a restrictor in the amount of things that I can get involved in, because I have to think about how to do it, figure out how to do it, get good at it, get skillful, so that I can lead by doing. And so I'm a backlog here on what I've said I would do, and now somebody's throwing something else on my plate. And knowing how to separate that from the skillful hands, I think, is a key to being able to be a better leader. Maybe not. Maybe you shouldn't have to. Maybe David's ability to lead was due to his focus. Maybe not.
Okay.
I think that you can be a good leader and not be terribly skillful at what it is that you're leading, ironically.
Yeah.
And I think that we shouldn't be hung up on trying to, oh, I can't do that because I can't do that. You know, I can't lead this particular group because I'm not good at that particular thing. I mean, I was asked to be fellowship ministry team leader, and I had no experience whatsoever that would make me think that I had any, qualifications to do this. The brunch that we held, the picnic that we held, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, I am so unqualified to do this. I have never, done any kind of catering. I have never done any organizing. I've never done any of this or any of that. First is there are people out there who are really, really good at these things. And it's kind of a question of just finding them and asking them to do it, and then just kind of relying on them. But I think we also learn a lot through, just through doing, just muddle on by. And I don't feel like, I don't really feel like I've failed at any of the things that I've taken a leadership role in. So maybe I'm good at the leadership and not at the other stuff. I don't know.
Well, Colin, you bring up an excellent point, and I had the opportunity to listen to General Colin Powell. He was on one of the morning shows a couple weeks ago. And one of the things he was talking about relative to leadership is that in an ideal setting, a good leader has integrity and a lot of skill, but if you have to leave one in the closet, leave the skill. And so he was very he was talking about how he trained his leaders. He was like, I'd love it if you could do it all, but if you can't do it all, I'm okay if you're not the master rifleman in the group, because there's going to be other people that can do that. I need you to be a good leader. And
The skills of the people that you're dealing with, right?
Absolutely.
And try to maximize that and use that.
Which is harder, I think, with volunteers. Because volunteers kind of have things set in their mind as to what they want to do, as opposed to, you know, if I'm the office manager, I know that you're good at this, so I'm going to ask you to do this, and I know that you're good at that, so I'm going to ask you to do that. And, you know, there's an amount of control that we don't have as, you know, as volunteer coordinators that Colin Powell obviously have.
And I like the word shepherded and piggyback off of what Betsy said, and I'm very into like word choice. So they didn't choose manage, they didn't choose coerce, they didn't even choose lead. They chose shepherd, which is more of a guide and more of a caretaker as opposed to a report filler outer.
And the other words in here were tended and guided. I was looking at all of them. I was looking at shepherded, leading, tending, and guiding. And I'm constantly trying to tell Grace that, you know, different words that really sound the same have different connotations, and just really trying to find the word that has the best connotation for the situation that you're using it in.
So there's a leadership quality which is looking after
Caring for
your flock in this case, right? You use shepherd.
But also everything that goes with that, because shepherds are tenacious and shepherds there's a lot of self-sacrifice with shepherding, and you know, you think of, you know, in these circumstances, Christ being the ultimate shepherd, and so it demands a lot to be a shepherd.
yeah, and I guess one of the things that I think a lot about word choice. I also think a lot about word placement. So when this verse was written, it didn't say lead by being the best, and then you're put in the top job. And if you think about kind of corporate America, a lot of times our leaders are the best at whatever their thing is. If it's accounting, you're the best accounting. Oh, you can be the supervisor of the accountants. Well, you may not know anything about managing people, and you may not really like it. You may really like being the accountant, okay? I think that God is trying to tell us the order, the priority of what it takes to be a spiritual leader. Shepherd first, high integrity, skill last. We'll get to the skill part. You need to have these other things, and I think that's kind of what helps us think about spiritual leadership. So let's close this part out with a short prayer, and then we'll get into the rest of the lesson. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, as we gather to develop our leadership, to be the kind of leaders that develop other leaders, help us, shepherd us, lead us to where we need to be, to the kind of leadership that we see in the biblical role models that we'll be studying. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So the first thing that you see in your notes is what's called a mental model of leadership. Does everybody understand what a mental model is? A mental model is kind of a framework. It's the way that we categorize things based on our experiences. And so, you know, if I was to throw up on the board leadership, Sylvia, you may have one thought based on your life experiences and what you've done about what leadership is, and Kevin, you may have another thought, and Tom, you may have another thought. And so what we want to do is just take a couple of minutes here and get you to think about how have you experienced leadership? What is the mental model that you framework? So when somebody says leader, you know, your brain goes to that place. So that's what we're going to ask you to think about for a minute. So what what you'll see in the request is without editing yourself. So don't worry about what you think somebody else should think about it, or what you think Craig or I should think about it, or anybody else. Really, this is your time to kind of empty your brain. Write down all the words and images, and you've got this whole paper, so it's yours. This is yours to take away. When you hear leader or leadership. So I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to do that. This is free flow of ideas. Okay. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to go around the room and I'm going to ask you to give me one word, just one word, that tells me where you've been influenced around this mental model. So anywhere in your life that you've been influenced that helped you frame what this mental model of leadership is. So,
Manager.
okay.
What?
Work.
Stretch.
Stretch.
Listen.
Okay.
Delegate.
Okay.
Sports.
Sports.
Create.
Creative. Tom.
Inspire.
Okay. Beth.
Work.
Work. Okay. So we've all kind of had our own universe that's helped create this mental model of leadership. Okay? And so the next one is to name 5 people who have most influenced you in your life. Again, don't filter this. Okay? Who are 5 people who have most influenced you in your life?
Positive, negative, left, right.
It can be either. Sometimes we have a negative experience to teach us what we want to do differently or where we want to be differently. So it can be a negative influencer, absolutely. Everybody got 5? No? Okay. Well, again, this is for you, so you can take this with you and can be thinking about it for certain. And we're not going to do always every Sunday every exercise that's listed here, so there may be some additional information. But look at the people that, at least a couple people that you've got on your list here. Do they share the characteristics and images of leadership that you did in the first exercise? Not really. Okay. Some do, some don't. Okay.
And they don't all have all of those skills.
They may have
Not
some,
all
but
of
not
those
all of them.
practices, yeah.
So when we're forming a mental model, it's not generally one experience or one particular event, although one experience or one event can be transformational. I remember going to a leadership conference and the keynote speaker was Benjamin Zander, who is the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic. And I thought, okay, what is this dude going to teach me about leadership? And as I was standing on my chair, singing Ode to Joy in German with 1,000 other people, and I don't know one word of German, please. I think I know one. There you go. But it was a truly transformational experience. So we can have one experience that can say, this transformed my mental model, but it doesn't frame the whole mental model. It's a significant life event. Mental models are things that we acquire over our lifetime. So you will see that your mental model changes and grows and expands and contracts and goes sideways and backways and flipways and whatever Willy Wonka's elevator does, slantways, as you experience different things. okay? So, what I want to do next is, I wanted one from everybody, so just popcorn them out, we're not going to go in order. Who are the Kirk's leaders and why? Jody, okay, why?
Vision,
Vision.
invitation.
So head pastor is an interesting comment. I want you to hold that because that's what we call positional power, or because somebody has the title, we say, yeah, well, you better be the leader. You're the senior pastor of the church. You know, if you're taking us off the cliff, we're all going to follow you. So that's one thing I want you to think about. We're going to expand on that later as we develop leadership. Who else?
Team building.
Team building?
You're talking about Jody still?
No, just another leader in the
Oh, that's
Kirk.
what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Jody.
Okay, yeah, I heard team building, I heard visionary.
The session.
The session, okay, why?
Again, I think that's
Positional.
Positional, yeah.
They're the elected
Mm-hmm,
positional as opposed to the appointed positional.
uh-huh,
But I think there's a lot of creativity that goes into running the session, setting the agenda, figuring out how to, what to do in meetings, how to run meetings.
And what not to do.
What not, exactly.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I know Jody has influence on all of
Well,
that.
that's was
Right,
right,
right.
too, by the book of order.
Okay, who else?
Larry.
Another leader.
Rich Winich,
Larry. Mm-hmm.
Rich Winich,
You're rich.
Rich Winich. Okay,
Sylvia and Craig,
Sylvia and Craig, absolutely.
Victoria.
Victoria, maybe not so much.
Ah, no self-filtering.
Joel,
I
absolutely.
would add Bonnie to that.
And Bonnie.
But
Mhm.
I think, you know, nobody's mentioned Stephanie, but
Yeah.
now that's a leadership that isn't as visible,
Absolutely.
but is really very strong.
You're absolutely right, Amir. And that's when I talk about my vision that we're all leaders from whatever chair we sit. My goal is when we ask this question at some point down the road and I say, who's a leader in the Kirk? Everybody's hand goes up. Okay? And everybody can point to everybody else in the room. You're a leader, you're a leader. Okay? So that's kind of where we want to get to. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay.
Nobody said Melinda.
Yeah.
Not as visible.
Again,
And so that's what we want to talk about. Leadership isn't necessarily equivalent to visibility, but that's back to our framing of what our mental models about leadership. You know, some of us have that framework that you need the title or you need to kind of be out there a lot.
And given your
and-
ministry team, you probably have had
She has been my go-to.
more
you know?
interaction with, so I mean,
Yeah.
you know, so from different perspectives.
Exactly.
There's a different person for each
Exactly.
different liaison, yeah.
Yep. So you have a different experience base with Melinda than somebody else might have. Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, to go back, I look around this room and I think everybody in this room is already a leader.
Mm-hmm.
They have, each has demonstrated it throughout the years, different ways, some more quietly than others.
Mm-hmm.
But I have seen everybody in this room in leadership roles and doing it successfully.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And there are many more out there.
And there
I
are
mean,
many
too many
more.
more
Yeah.
to name. But
And I mean, when we talk about people who were not necessarily willing or didn't feel qualified, you know, the number and we think about it in terms of biblically, the number one I think about is Moses. Hello. Who are you talking to? You know. So there are leaders, and God sees who the leaders are. And you know, our goal, like I said, is to have everybody be a leader.
sorry.
No, I understand completely. So let's, I want to shift a little bit and talk about biblical models of leadership, because that is our focus. Our focus is to really look at spiritual leadership. So there's Bibles out on the table. You can put an extra one down there. You can share and have this be conversational. But what I'd like you to do is to very carefully, from your own biblical experience or browsing through the Bible, I'd like you to try to find 2 Old Testament and 1 or 2 New Testament stories that talk about biblical leadership. Okay? And I want you to think about the leaders that are in that story. And if you could, as you find the story, try to find one verse. Like we started with the verse about David, just one verse. There's a whole lot to David's story, but we're going to try to pinpoint and pick out one verse that speaks to leadership in a biblical way. Okay? And you can do this as a group. It's not
What if
an
you don't know where to
individual
find it
thing.
in the Bible?
Pardon?
So what if you don't know where to find it in the Bible?
Ask me.
Ask Craig. Yes.
Okay. Who, asked Craig? Can I?
What's the story? That's
The person who went to,
But it's
Pharisees, they asked for Jesus' body.
Nicodemus, John 2.
What they said.
Okay.
I would bet probably, I'm thinking Matthew.
Actually, no, it'll be in John, and there's the opening in the beginning of John in John 2, and then the closing around after the crucifixion, but I forget exactly where that is in the Gospel of John.
Yeah, which goes to the end of John. So again, what I'd like you to do, and just pick one verse in respective time, one verse from one of the stories that you came up with. I'd like to know a couple stories that you found, but one verse from one story that speaks to biblical leadership. Very similar to pulling out this one verse from Psalms.
No, I have Craig and Claire for that.
Where's Joshua? Where's Joshua after the first Bible? Chapter 24.
Seriously?
Oh,
Claire.
when we said
I have a
seriously
daughter like
ask
that
Craig,
too.
when we
I have
said
a daughter
seriously
like
ask
that.
Craig, we meant seriously
Yeah.
ask Craig.
And I have, his older daughter's just like that.
She's better than I am, or
Oh
at least she
my God.
was.
She was scared. I have news.
All right, Craig,
Photographic memory.
which book does Jesus say through that? That's following me.
He didn't say exactly either of those, he said both of those, but they were in different places. In the beginning of Mark, he says, "Come, follow me." And I believe it would be
You
in,
know that one.
it may also be in Mark where he says, "Cast out your nets." They're two different scenes. In my memory, anyway, Kevin. It doesn't hold true.
It's Paul who wrote Acts and Corinthians.
Luke wrote Acts,
Luke wrote
Paul
Acts.
wrote Corinthians.
Paul wrote Corinthians. Let's see.
Where is there something here is, yeah.
I'm not interested in comparison.
Did everybody get one verse?
I have people, no verses.
I'll give you about another minute or so.
Yes. Yes. into not yet. So let's go in obvious.
Let's see where he
I was just
responded.
thinking, that was literally in my head. Oh, first person came to mind, that's so funny.
Okay, everybody got one?
One.
Okay, well, let's go with one. All right, so let's start with Liz and Sylvia.
Okay.
Get broken or not.
Sitting on one.
We actually, well, we found two since there's two of us.
Okay.
And one of the things we found, so we did Exodus 16, 10, 11.
We couldn't do just one because
Okay,
it's
that's
sort of.
fine,
And
because it
Josh-
fell into the other
Yeah,
one.
and Joshua 24, 1. And one of the things we found interesting with both of these passages.
Can you read it?
Yeah. Tell them what we found interesting when I looked for these
Oh.
passages.
Well, that actually God was speaking through each of these men,
Mm-hmm.
Moses and Joshua. And then
Okay.
Moses was actually speaking, directing Aaron, who was doing the speaking to the people.
Okay.
And Joshua was speaking to the people, but the Lord was speaking to him as he was speaking.
10, okay. And as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the Israelites, they looked toward the wilderness, and the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. The Lord spoke to Moses and said, I have heard the complaining of the Israelites. Say to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God. That was
So who was influenced by the speaking?
All of them,
All
I
of them.
think, but hopefully especially the people,
Yeah.
since he heard the complaints.
Mm-hmm. And how were they influenced? What about the story helped them to be influenced, besides just the words?
Trust.
Mm-hmm.
well, and that what was revealed happened. What was told to them.
Okay. But there was a whole lot of faith, right?
Yeah, well, it's
A whole lot of
trust,
faith to this story.
Uh-huh.
Absolutely. Okay. Kevin? What'd you find?
I like this story. I mentioned it before, Jesus, when he recruits the first disciples.
Mm-hmm.
And it's Mark 1, say 17. And Jesus said to them, follow me and I will make you fish for people. And immediately they left their nets and followed him.
Okay.
Just in speaking the vision of what he was looking to do and the connection that the first disciples had to that vision, they responded directly. So.
And yeah, and in that one, think about again word choice. I will make you fishers of men. They knew the fishing business. That was the business that they knew. So if he said, I'm gonna make you disciples, or I'm gonna make you chose another word that they weren't as familiar with, that they didn't know that quote business, they may still have gone,
Yeah.
but he made that instant connection. So that's a big part of spiritual leadership, is kind of making that connection. Okay? That's what, Tom, what did you guys find?
Beth and I picked out from Genesis chapter 6, verse 21, 22. This is about Noah. And essentially the passage up to that is where God gives very specific instructions about what he wants Noah to do. You do to this kind of animal, you do to this kind of animal, and you will bring in food and store it, and et cetera, and so forth. And then in verse 22 it says, just quite flatly, Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. So, you want to call it ironic. Ironically, what made Noah a good leader, one of the things, was that he was a good follower of God. He accepted the sovereignty of God and did what he was directed to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and before any of us can lead, we all have to learn to be good followers. Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, Colleen?
I came across Solomon,
Mm-hmm.
and Solomon, chapter 1, verse 7, that night God appeared to Solomon and said to him, ask what I shall give you. Solomon said to God, you have shown great and steadfast love to my father David and have made me succeed him as king. O Lord God, let your promise to my father David now be fulfilled, for you have made me king over a people as numerous as the dust of the earth. Give me now wisdom and knowledge to go out and come in before this people, for who can rule this great people of yours? So he's asking for wisdom and knowledge, which I think God goes on to say that he gives it to him because he's asked for wisdom and knowledge and not for riches and possessions.
Colleen, what was the reference on that? Which book?
Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, chapter 1, verse 7. Verse 7 to 11, it looks like.
And he said, to God, let your promise be fulfilled in me.
In me.
What you started in David, let it be continued in me.
Which sounds like your will be done, basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So he's not saying, go give me the smarts and the skills so I can go off by myself and lead this country. He's saying, you walked with my father, I need you to walk with me through this journey. Absolutely. Betsy?
I don't have any citations, I just have people.
Okay.
Noah was one of my people.
Okay.
Nicodemus, obviously, because I was thinking about how he stood up to the Pharisees and the courage that it took to kind of come forth and ask for Jesus' body and protect that. Paul, and in the sense of all the writing that he did and the spreading of the word, and then the other one that I was determined to find a woman, and so I picked Ruth. So.
Great. So the last thing we want to do in the last couple of minutes, and part of this is for us to get a sense of timing. There's some journaling at the end of each of these. In today's, the journaling is going to be in between this week and next week. So, but what I'd like to do is look on this page that says forming a new mental model. So what we've done, when we've lived our lives up to this point, we've created this mental model, which is kind of the sum total of our experiences and what we've seen in other people. And we want to make this transition to spiritual leadership, which means we need to kind of start thinking about things in maybe a new or different way. There might be some things that we need to take on in our mental models, and there might be some things we need to let go of in our mental models. So what I'd like to do in this last couple minutes is just start looking at what's the difference about being a leader in a corporation and about being a leader in the church. Because some things are the same and some things are different. Okay? So if you see the word leader in a corporate setting, what does that say to you?
Boss.
Boss. Okay.
Someone that can hire or fire.
Hire and fire. Kind of hard to do when you're dealing with volunteers, huh? Yeah.
Authoritarian.
Authoritarian. Okay.
Financial success.
Pardon?
Financial success.
Financial success. Absolutely. If you don't turn the coin, what happens to your role as a leader in a corporation?
You get let go.
You don't hold
Your
it
board of
very long,
directors.
right? The board of directors says, sorry, you're a nice guy, but we don't need nice guys, right?
There was, I just want to throw this out there, because when you were going around and asking us where our mental models were formed by,
Mm-hmm.
none of us mentioned media and the movies.
Yeah.
And I looked so much at the list of the words that I wrote, not all of which have positive connotations to me, and I think that most of that mental model for me, and I said sports because I think it is where I developed a lot of leadership, and so I exhibited a lot of leadership. But if I step outside that role and where I think of leadership, it's media and movies, and then they're not all very positive.
Mm-hmm.
So
I hear you.
it's interesting.
Okay.
Nobody mentioned politics either.
Or politics.
exactly.
Absolutely.
I listed one politician, I could list others.
Yeah, I listed several
I listed
presidents.
one.
So now let's make the shift over to leader in a church. What are some of the things that we need to think about in our mental model when we come to leader in the church?
Grace.
Grace.
That's a good way.
Wonderful word.
That is.
Wonderful piece to add to our mental model. What else?
Accepting.
Accepting. What else?
Inspiring.
Inspiring. Let's go down to towards the end of that table where it says labor. When we think about labor in the corporate world, what do we think about?
For a leader, meetings.
Meetings?
Well, that's what I think of.
Okay.
Commodity.
Commodity.
It's an asset.
An asset, absolutely.
An asset
And
to be
they're
managed.
workers, right? They're workers. They do something and we pay them.
Yeah, and so along that same vein, disconnection.
Disconnection, yeah. How many colleagues have you ever worked with that have said, you know, I'm here for me? If we do okay as a team, fine, but, you know, my goal is to put food on my table for my family and I'm gonna do my thing, okay? What about labor in the church?
Selfless.
Selfless. I think Colleen's point is really important. Volunteers.
Still a lot of meetings.
Still a lot of meetings. We're gonna try to work on that. What else about labor?
When I think about corporate, I think power, I think about unions, I think about organization.
Okay. What about in the church?
Teams.
Teams?
Teamwork here.
Yeah, I look back on my time in the Coast Guard Reserve. In boot camp, they taught us be a shipmate, do your job, do it well, and then help your shipmates. And when I got into the real Coast Guard, that wasn't what it was like. It was do as little as possible and shuffle as much off on other people as you can.
I was saying
Sad.
state employee.
Sadly. Yeah, I met a lot of state employees like that. Was a state employee myself at one time. So that's a labor difference. It's you know, what can I take on? How can I be helpful? How can I contribute? Not how can I shuffle as much to others as possible.
It's still,
You
still
hope
80,
not.
it's still 80-20.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
there are. Yeah.
Yep.
I think you're right. I have to admit that.
And one of the things that, as we develop our mental models around leadership, there's some of the other words that we've thrown out when we talk about ministry teams, passions and gifts,
That was one of my words.
service. Okay? And these are the things as we develop our leadership skills, those, you know, when we talk about word choice and word placement, those are kind of the choice and placement issues that we all have to get our heads around. When we, instead of talking about, I need 30 volunteers for blah, blah, blah job, I need 30 people whose passion it is to feed the homeless because we've got Win coming next week. As opposed to, Win is coming next week and I need 16 volunteers and I need somebody to drive the van and somebody to cook it. Is feeding the homeless a passion of yours? Great, because I've got something to meet that passion. So we want to start thinking about word choice and word placement in how we get volunteers so that service becomes part of their word choice and word placement.
Yeah, that's a great example of the type of thing that needs to be solved in the Kirk. A lot of missions like that are understaffed,
Yeah.
and that's a great example of one right there.
I am mindful of time and we have run over, so I'm not as mindful as I had hoped to be. Just by a couple of minutes. I'm going to close this in prayer in about 30 seconds. Just in 30 seconds, how was today? Pace, structure, format. And we we did introductory stuff, so next week we'll have more time to be in the material.
Will the material be online ahead of
Yeah.
time?
Yes, it can be.
We can do that, absolutely.
And I will show you before you leave, if you look at my computer, before we leave, and I'll send out an email when I get the email list back, a link to where you'll find the material.
I just think it would be helpful
To be
To
thinking
for
about
me for
things.
conversation.
Okay.
Also want to say that I'm teaching for the next several weeks, so the fact that I won't be here, don't take that as any indication that I wasn't interested, just I'm going to be teaching.
Okay. We get it. We're good with that. So, in the week, if something comes up, please email Craig, email me. We're good about smattering out to everybody on the team, so you don't need to email us in gang. But just one of us, and let us know if we want to change things, do things a little bit different. And like I said, we're pretty flexible. So let's go ahead and have a quick closing prayer, and I will see you all next week, hopefully. Lord God, we thank you for this opportunity to come together, to be able to have this conversation, to have the passion around becoming spiritual leaders as we develop ourselves, as we develop other leaders in the Kirk. We ask your continued blessing to guide us through these sessions that are coming. And we ask that you return us safely next week. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
And if I could have volunteers to grab a table and take it into grab a table